Hey everybody, welcome to your readings for the week. These are the readings for the week ending the 24th. Yes, I just did the horoscopes for the same week. Okay, we can see where my brain is today. Yes, these are the horoscopes for the week ending June 24th. We are ending Gemini season. We're beginning Cancer season. We have the summer solstice this week. We have some pretty big challenges ending this week. And some other challenges that are beginning. So let's go ahead and hop into it. We're going to start. I have my list here. I'm actually prepared this time. We're going to start with Darcy. So, really cool stuff going on in Taurus this week. First of all, that big T-square is over. Jupiter does start off the week in a square with Venus and Pluto, both of which break up by the end of the week. Jupiter is also in a grand sextile at the beginning of the week. This does start to break up at the end of the week as well. With the Sun and Saturn, and a grand sextile is actually a very helpful aspect. So we're not talking a challenge, we're talking a way over the challenge. Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus are focused on finances and long-term goals. Put those two things together, really focused on long-term financial goals. At this stage, a lot of times we're thinking about retirement. We're thinking about the future. If you're in the same boat that I am, then you're starting to realize that you haven't thought of your future at all, and maybe you need to start doing that. So actually, this is a very helpful aspect because the Sun's focus is on career, which is where ultimately, generally, the money comes from, and your legacy, in terms of your knowledge and what you know how to do. And Saturn is retrograde and focused on your day-to-day schedule. So I know you have a crazy work schedule. And I have heard you say, I don't have time because I work 12-hour shifts and I never have time. Everybody has some time. I mean, I assume you have days off, and it all is in what you do with the time that you do have. But I also am being shown the possibility of more time opening up as well. That could mean a cutback in hours. It could mean an opportunity for a job that allows you to work less hours but get paid roughly the same, if that makes sense. So and honestly, I mean, a cutback in hours is not necessarily a good thing when you're relying on the money. But if what you're doing isn't exactly where you want to be, sometimes this freeing up of space is necessary in order to help you make the choice to move to where you do want to be, if that makes sense. Financial security is important. Enjoying your life is important also. So there is that. The challenges that Uranus faces in terms of your long-term goals basically are in his square with Mars, which actually becomes Mars and Venus, and about Thursday becomes Mars and Venus and the moon as the moon moves into conjunction with all three planets. Now, Mars and Venus is your typical balance of the masculine and the feminine, the logical and the emotional. Adds just a little bit more emotion to that with the moon. Being that it is a square, it's basically a challenge because with all of these planets being focused on your support system, it does kind of feel like you're doing this on your own over and over again and have very little support. And it's getting frustrating and it's getting old, if that makes sense. At the same time, though, I know a lot of women who have gone through very similar to what you're going through, if not the same thing. And the truth is that that mentality alone really gets in your way of you being successful, because you just want it to be something different. And the truth is that an independent woman who can take care of herself, who doesn't have to answer to anybody, who doesn't have to rely on anybody, even the most reliable person can be unreliable for whatever reason, which just makes it even more difficult than if you were just on your own, if that makes sense. There is a blessing and a curse in absolutely every situation. So the grass is not always greener. Don't let that stumble you up, if that makes sense. The last thing that I'm being shown for you for this week, I do see an opportunity. I see you being presented with an opportunity that has to do with bringing in money. It is a little difficult in terms of the timing of it, but it seems kind of exciting. It's not like you can leave what you're doing to completely move over to this, because it's not making quite the amount of money that you need yet. But I look at it as it's an interesting time to take a look at how you could shuffle things around to kind of open up that space, because it's almost like it's bringing in money, but it is a social space at the same time, and you really need that, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you, Darcy. I am moving on to Kendra. We've got some interesting stuff here going on in Taurus. First of all, Jupiter has been in a square with Venus as well as Pluto, which is ending at the end of the week, which is really nice. That's sort of like, I kind of feel that's going to line up with your not having to travel so much anymore, if that makes sense. Because that seems to have been the big thing that's been in the way of you being able to move on with a lot of different things, if that makes sense. So that's sort of how I see that playing out. But that and as that we move out of that, we'll also have Jupiter in a grand sextile with the Sun and Saturn at the same time. And Saturn is retrograde, and this is actually really interesting what's coming out of this particular aspect. This isn't a challenge. This is how the planets are working together to help you. Jupiter and Uranus are both focused on Taurus, focused on finances and long-term goals. So really looking at the long-term financial aspects here. With Jupiter all about expansion in your finances and growth in your finances, the Sun's focused on career, which is where you shine, and Saturn's focus on your day-to-day schedule and it being retrograde. What's interesting about that is the concept that keeps coming up is we always say we don't have time for different things because, we have a lot of things going on. And if you're one of those people like I am, thinking about all the things that you have going on, that just makes you feel like you have even less time, if that makes sense. So Saturn's retrograde is kind of sort of like, okay, you're responsible for your schedule. So you make time in your schedule for whatever it is that you want to devote your time to. And I really feel that this has a lot to do with your project, your side project that you're trying to turn into your long-term project. So it basically is just moving things around a little bit to be able to create some space, even if it's not a lot of space, to be able to focus your time on that. Or to meditate on that. The words meditate on that are really important also around your project this week. There might be some ideas that pop up with that meditation that are important, if that makes sense. Uranus is in a square, which is a challenge with Venus and Mars and the moon as the moon moves into this on Thursday. So it's just like it goes from one planet to 2 to 3 throughout the week. The challenge sort of gets worse throughout the week, if that makes sense. Luckily, it's a short-term one, so that's good. The issue here with this challenge is Uranus is focused on long-term goals. And since we're talking about finances, we might as well talk about where we're going to go from here in terms of the financial future. And when you have Venus and Mars together, one, they represent the logic and emotion, the masculine and the feminine of us as individuals. But they also kind of represent a couple too. And in some cases, a couple not seeing eye to eye with the plan. So when you add the moon to that, that just sort of amplifies everything that's going on. So it really is important to sit down and have a discussion, a serious discussion, bringing how you both feel the future looks like, rather than have the disagreement, if that makes sense. Because I feel like when you guys get to that disagreement space, you both get really stubborn and you dig your heels in, and there's no moving either one of you, kind of a thing. And you both, once you walk away from it and come back, you have that ability to walk away and kind of go over it in your mind and go, okay, where did I go wrong? Okay, let me adjust that. And then you have a discussion and you work everything out. So this is more about being mindful that it's coming so that you can just bypass the whole fight thing and just go straight to the discussion and make things like way easier on everybody when you think about it. The last thing that I'm being shown for you is I keep seeing this space, and I'm not sure if it's something that you've thought of yet, but I keep seeing this space, and it's an outdoor space, and it's very small, it's very shaded, and it's almost like it's not small, it's just like a little cubby in the outside space that's completely yours. And I see over time different things being put into this space that is creating your space, if that makes sense. And eventually I keep seeing this space as like a place for you to have your tea or your coffee or just meditate or just be outside or just, it's like your own little corner. You're not completely inaccessible, but over time, everyone will understand that when you're in this space, it's almost like this is your private time. I don't know. I don't know why this keeps coming up, other than if you're drawn to a specific space, there's a reason for it. And I feel like this is a space that you're going to create that's like your own little bubble and your meditation space and your protection space and your safety space, all wrapped into one. And there's just something really exciting about creating this space. I'm really excited for you, maybe even a little bit jealous, but not really. I could do that. I just don't have the motivation. Maybe that's why this is coming up. You have so much to do that is not important. It is absolutely important. Trust me, once you get there, you'll be so happy that you did it. So that's what I have for you, Kendra. And I am moving on to Jeannette. Jeannette, the party's over. It's so sad. The party's over. And the sun is moving out of Gemini because it's solstice week. So, okay, the sun is moving out of Gemini and the Gemini party is over, but it's summertime party starting, although you're in Las Vegas now. So I bet that sucks. Really, really, really bad. I'll think of you when I'm like, oh my God, I'm dying. I can't believe how hot it is in the valley. And it's going to be like 10 degrees, 15 degrees hotter out there in Las Vegas. Hell no. I went there in August once. It sucked. There's Emrys. That little black blob right there. That's Emrys. So yeah, so sad. The Gemini party is ending, but we still have Mercury influencing Gemini this week, which has good points and its bad points. The sun spends his last few days in your sign in a grand sextile with Jupiter and Saturn. Now that's kind of interesting because the sun's focus is on career. What are you going to do for money, basically? Jupiter is focused on expanding in terms of finances, which is also a really good thing. And then we have Saturn in retrograde focused on your day-to-day schedule. So, what does that mean? Does this mean that somehow magically time is going to open up for me to be creative? No, it means you better look at your schedule and make that time. Now, here's one of the things that I've learned that might help you out, okay? Working from home is not an easy thing because you develop home habits at home and you develop work habits at work. And when the two connect together, one tends to take over the other, and it's not usually the work habits taking over the home, it's vice versa. So all of my home habits move into work, and that makes things unmotivating at times. I get really easily distracted by what's going on in the household, the people in the household, that mess over there that, drives me crazy when I'm not working, but when I'm creatively stuck, it drives me so crazy. I have to go clean it right now, like right now. So I feel like what's actually coming out of this is Saturn's way of saying, hey, work with how you are, not against how you are. So rather than focusing on, I have to be in my craft room for 8 hours a day creating, schedule a few hours intermittently during the day. That way you give yourself the opportunity to go back and forth between different things, and you are working with your Gemini need to move and bounce from one thing to another. And it may even help you be able to finish projects that you start. Not saying that you have a bad habit of that. We all have a bad habit of that. And I think intellectuals specifically really have a bad habit of that, because once you get bored with a project, your brain starts going a mile a minute. You have to move to something that takes a little bit more brain power, if that makes sense. So it's kind of annoying being brilliant. I know, but that's why we are them, right? Because it takes pretty badass bitches to be as smart as we are. I'm just saying. Mercury is interesting. Mercury is in a sextile with Venus and Mars. Now, Mercury is right on the cusp of your long-term goals in your career. So we're really focusing on long-term career goals here. Now, on one hand, I feel like you've made that decision and you know exactly which direction you're going in. But on the other, I still see some doubts and some going flip-flopping back and forth between outside of the home, inside of the home. Okay. So with that being said, Mercury's sextile with these two planets, and these two planets represent the balance between the masculine and the feminine, or the balance between the logic and the creative or emotional. And so, and the moon kind of moves into that actually on Thursday and just amplifies this. Now, the fact that it's a sextile means all of these planets are working together for a common cause. So it's not a challenge. It's like you really do have support for your career goals. You just need to make the decision. You just need to say, okay, this is the one I'm sticking with. And then you have all the support that you need. The lack of support seems to come from not having that definitive, this plan, this is what I'm going to do, if that makes sense. And when you're dealing with a fixed signs want to know that there's security in the outcome. So if you're flipping from one thing to another, that doesn't seem very secure, and that kind of freaks out the fixed sign, if that makes sense, which is going to show in the square that Mercury is in with Saturn. So here, Saturn is in this really helpful place, and then turns around and is like, just kidding, I'm going to totally screw you, right? again, it's all about time. Okay. You can say all day long, I don't have time for this or that other thing, or you could take control over the fact that it is your schedule and you do run it. Okay. And one of the things that was helpful for me, or is helpful for me, is that I need to put everything on my schedule, because if it's not on my schedule, it doesn't get done. And if I have a day where nothing is on my schedule, my brain says, well, that's the day for me to just float around and basically not get anything done, right? Some days that's okay. I actually do schedule those days for myself because I have to be able to float around and get nothing accomplished. Working with my sign and not against it. And that's really the success. Gemini's success is all in working with your sign and with those traits and not against them. So that's what I have for you this week. That's quite a lot, isn't it? Feels like it's quite a lot, but it's a good boost in the right direction. Okay, we are going to move on to Connie. So, okay, lots of stuff going on in Leo this week. Let's get to the good news. Let's just start off with the good news, okay? Because I really just am so happy that Mars is finally focused on something other than trauma. So that may actually hopefully be some good energy towards not a lot of it going on right now around you, as far as what has been going on with the Brussels sprout. Okay. It is still on the cusp this week a little bit, but it is moving away from the cusp. So by the end of the week, it's far enough away that it's not influencing things quite as much. The moon, however, comes into Leo basically Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So it's popping in there on Tuesday. It's popping in there in opposition with Pluto. Pluto is focused on those you love. The moon is focused on those that support you. Those things don't always line up. So that is unfortunately one of those instances where it feels like the people that are supposed to be supportive are not being supportive. Or it could also play out in the reverse, where you're trying to be supportive to somebody who is not allowing you to be supportive, if that makes sense. So yes, very, very annoying there. Then as we move into Wednesday and Thursday, the moon moves into conjunction with Mars and Venus, all of which are in your sign. Everything is focused on those that support you. Two things. First of all, Mars and Venus together, as they're moving closer and closer into conjunction with each other, they are the quintessential balance, or I should say representation of the balance between the heart and the mind, between the logic and the creative, between the masculine and the feminine that exists inside of all of us. So as they line up in a sextile with Mercury, being able to use this balanced sort of energy towards your career is very helpful. And when you think about it, the position that you are in, you really do have to play that role of both. You have to, to say it this way, but be the man, or take the male approach of the logic of why this makes sense, but the feminine creative approach, which is how does this feel? So I feel two things. One, there is going to be situations where this is absolutely necessary coming up this week, especially on these days, Wednesday and Thursday. But also, I feel like it's almost as everything is coming together, it clicks. And the way to do that absolutely makes 100% sense, if that makes sense. So it kind of works in a couple of different ways, if that makes sense. The other thing is the little bit of the difficulty or the challenge. Now, Venus has been in a square with Jupiter and will continue that square up until about the end of the week when that sort of ends, which is good. But Venus, Mars, and the moon are both in a square with Uranus and Jupiter, both of which are in Taurus right now and are focused on long-term financial goals. Couple of things. Again, we're talking about support and the lack of support making it difficult for you to achieve those goals. That very well could be coming from the company. If the problems that have existed continue into this week, and this sounds like they may, that can also mean that you've had it up to here with that and you finally have it out with them about that situation. And the thing is that if you need to move on, you've had an idea of another avenue to go in. I am getting this itchiness right here, of another avenue to go in. Okay, if you haven't done that yet, because you're just like, well, just sit around and wait and see what happens. It takes big issues to push us to do that. So we can either make the choice and just do it, or we can get pushed into it. Either way, we're doing it. So that's pretty much where that goes. Your long-term financial goals have everything to do with whether or not you have money coming in or you don't have money coming in. So you need to make sure, it's up to you to ensure that the money is flowing, not necessarily up to the company. I mean, yes, if they want to stay in business, they really should. But ultimately, you don't rely on them solely for income. There are other avenues out there. You just have to find them, basically. So that's what I have for you this week. I don't think I want to add any more to any of that. Well, no, I'm sorry, Frankie. We're going to add a little Frankie to it because Frankie is so much fun. Frankie is saying, she's giving me that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink thing. And I feel like this is like an older man that she's showing me. And you have explained it in every possible way you can. She's saying that he knows what he's doing and he's still doing it. Stop beating yourself up like you're not perfect, like you're making a mistake. He knows what he's doing and he's still doing it to himself anyways. You can't blame yourself for somebody else's stinking thinking. Although you can help him around that because you have some experience with that also. I'm going to leave that there. That is what I have for you, Connie. Moving on to Jenny. Okay, well, let's start with the good news. And the good news is that Mars is moving out of focusing on inner trauma because it's been long enough. Okay. Long enough. Very happy to hear that, especially because it's all going on in Leo right now and it directly affects you. But we do have Venus moving closer and closer into conjunction with Mars this week. And we have the moon coming into Leo about Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday also, moving into conjunction with Mars and Venus. And this is all a very interesting makeup here because one, when Venus and Mars are working together, Venus and Mars are the example of masculine and feminine working symbiotically together, especially as they're moving in conjunction with each other. When they're right next to each other, from an astrological point of view, that means they are working together, pardon me, in within that particular space that they're focused on, which currently is your support system. So when I say the masculine feminine balance, we're talking about logic and creativity, or logic and emotion, thinking and feeling, masculine and feminine. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at that balance. But what is important, I feel, in terms of looking at how this affects you, is I feel like being a single mom, you are both. You have to be both, the father and the mother, if that makes sense. And I feel like the moon coming into that is really going to make that emotional. It's almost like I'm visualizing you going, I'm tired of having to play both roles. Like, I would love to just take on one or the other. I don't even care which one it is, right? Because it gets, parenting gets emotionally overwhelming after a while. And you've got all daughters. I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine what that looks like. So not that daughters are bad, of course, but girls do tend to be a little bit more emotional than boys. Boys just tend to be wild and aggressive and suck you dry. Anyways, the point is that I feel like something may be coming up around that, which is just it. I don't like to say it this way, but it's almost like I'm seeing you hiding in the closet to just have a good cry by yourself, because it's just been so overwhelming that you need to do that. And if you need to do that, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. In fact, I think that it is just a good idea to do every now and then. It helps so that you're not quite so overwhelmed. And I do think that things smooth out afterwards. It's just one of those things where teenagers, what else are you gonna say? These planets do or are, I should say, in a sextile with Mercury all week long. This is actually very interesting because Mercury is focused on career. So with Leo being focused on your support system, it is actually interesting to see that your support system sort of has that balance. And it's like it's almost like, especially when the moon moves into it, it almost feels like when there's a problem, your posse is there to help you deal with it, if that makes sense, especially in the office. However, they all also move into a square with Uranus and Jupiter, which are focused on long-term financial goals. So this is, you got problems in the office, you got your posse there to help you fix it. This one's a little bit more personal. It's not necessarily something that you can use your posse for, if that makes sense. But also, I feel like it's really important to say that panicking is not going to be helpful, because I feel like this is one of those things where this is something that comes up that makes you go, oh my God, this is going to cost so much money and I'm going to have to take it out of my. Don't panic. Look into it first. It may not be exactly as crazy as it seems right off the bat, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you, Jenny. I am gonna move on to Linda. So we have some moon action coming in at the end of the week. Virgo is still focused on self. Ceres is still right on the cusp. So 0 degrees Libra all week long, which means basically right on the cusp. Her influence can still be felt in your sign. But that moon coming in is interesting. And actually, Ceres on one side and the moon coming in actually creates an interesting balance there. Ceres is focused on self. So we're talking about care of nurturing of self, which we have been talking about now for a couple of weeks. The moon, on the other hand, is coming in with an influence of trauma, inner trauma, old emotional baggage coming to the surface, and in the form of triggers. So what's interesting about this to me, and the moon's influence is on this for a couple of days, so Friday and Saturday, basically right at the end of the week there, having these triggers being triggered, and specifically with the moon in opposition with Saturn, these triggers are going to take up, these are deep, so they're going to take up a little bit more time than they normally would take up. And that is, of course, a difficulty for you with your schedule, because you don't really have the time. You don't want to give up the time. You have responsibilities. You have things to do. You don't have time for this. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like you really get a choice on whether or not you want to have the time for it. It is what it is. It's happening. The more you try and push it away, the longer it takes you to work through the trigger and kind of come to terms with it, if that makes sense. The good news is the moon's trines with Jupiter and Uranus, which are focused on long-term financial goals. So actually, this is where these really deep triggers actually come up to help you. As you're working through them, you get ideas of different ways to help you get out of a situation that you don't want to be in, if that makes sense, or at least help you to have some sort of freedom within that situation. And I feel like, I think, well, let me just put it this way. The beauty of triggers and the beauty of the healing process of our trauma from the past, the gifts are in the things that we learn and the different ways that our mindsets change to allow us to be able to open up opportunities that maybe we wouldn't have thought of before, if that makes sense. So while it's difficult, there's a lot of beautiful things that come out of it, if that makes sense. The other thing that I'm being shown for you this week is, I just feel like, and I don't know if you can or you can't, there's just not enough time. It's like all you want is that Calgon, take me away. Like literally the commercial with the lady in the bubble bath with the glass of wine and the music, and nobody exists outside of that room. And I feel like that is something that you would just love to do, but can't for whatever reason. Which I get. I want to say that there are other ways. You need to take some time to meditate. Really pulled strongly to tell you, you need to take some time to meditate. It's not quite the same thing, but it is helpful. The last thing that I have for you, I don't know what this is. Okay. I'm being told to tell you, we all have like an emergency pack in the car. Well, I would think you do, you're a Virgo. We all have an emergency pack in the car, but there's like, it's showing me like one of those long, like fluorescent lamp thingies. So either something like that or a flashlight. They're just telling me that you need to have one in your emergency pack if you don't have one, or if it was taken out to be used, it needs to be replaced, because you don't want to be caught in the dark without a flashlight. So that's what I have for you, Linda. Then the phone said yes. I don't know if you heard that, but the phone said absolutely get the flashlight. Okay. It didn't really say that, but we're going to go with it. All right, moving on to Matalyn. Focus is still on self. So, well, it's Virgo, it's all about you, right? Series is in Libra, but 0 degrees, so it is still on the cusp. So that nurturing influence still exists, and that nurturing is towards yourself. And actually, it's a good influence to have specifically towards the end of the week, the last 2 days of the week, as the moon moves into Virgo. Couple of things are going to happen there. First of all, the moon's focus is on old trauma. Now, here's the best thing about being 18 years old, okay? If you have trauma, it's not that old. I know I'm not trying to say you're young and you don't know anything, okay? What I'm saying is that when you have things that you're holding on to that become emotional crutches over time, when you work through and accept and let them go now, it's much easier than say when you get into your 30s and 40s. So your trauma becomes less of a burden because you're dealing with it at a young age, which is good. However, it also puts you in a difficult situation because you can't relate sometimes to other people and their trauma, if that makes sense. And that is a thing. And I hate to say this because it gets on my nerves so bad, but those people have a tendency when you're trying to help them to go, well, you wouldn't understand because you have both your parents and blah, 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 right? Those people, oh my God. But let me just share a little wisdom from your old aunt over here, because I used to have that problem a lot with when I talk to women and had relationship problems. And how would you know what I'm going through? You've got a man, he's wonderful. It's people don't realize how much work it really does take every single day of your life to have a good relationship. And it's not just like I literally had somebody wave a magic wand and boom, there he was, and he's perfect, and I'm perfect, and life is wonderful, and we're just all perfect, right? It obviously does not work that way. And, every day of your life, you will learn that same lesson. It does not work that way. You have to put a lot of work and effort into it every single day of your life. With that being said, I used to feel really bad and would hold back on talking about my relationship because I didn't want people to feel bad. And then there came a point where I sort of realized that not being proud of my accomplishments in order to help somebody else's feelings about themselves is unfair. And I did the work, and I continue to do the work every single day. And now when I'm approached with that is what I say. Well, it is a lot of work to be in a good relationship. And we each put that work into the relationship every single day. I'm very grateful and I'm very fortunate, right? That way, I don't have to feel like I'm hiding myself and my accomplishments, but I'm not pointing the finger at other people and saying this is what you're doing to screw up your life. Although trust me when I say that there's plenty of opportunities where I would love to do that. The moon's placement actually is also very helpful in terms of releasing old mindsets when it comes to money. Now, you've learned what you've learned, right? Life is going to help you learn even more. And you're going to learn by taking risks, failing miserably, and doing it again, right? Because that is basically how we learn. When the moon's trines with Uranus and Jupiter, which are focused on long-term financial goals, is actually really helpful because it's putting those mindsets that you currently have into their place and saying, okay, but let's explore further and see what else is what other possible solutions there are to the problem. So obviously, for instance, if you want money, you have to make money. I mean, there is no way that I can think of that you can be financially independent and not work. It's, if you do find it, please let me know because I'd like it too. Okay. And I'm sure your mother would. You might as well just share it with everybody. Obviously you have to work, right? But it's all about, you going to work hard and make a little money, or are you going to work smart and not hard, right? So it is finding that balance of something that is going to generate income, but also something that you enjoy also. And I do see some opportunities for you to explore coming up here in the next week or two, quite possibly around this whole magical moon in your sign thing. In fact, on Sunday, when the moon moves into a different focus and more focus on self, that may be when the opportunity really presents itself. So that's what I have for you, darling. I'm going to move on to Theresa. We have no planets in Libra. We do have Ceres moving into Libra, 0 degrees by the end of the week in Libra, officially back. Ceres is known as the Great Mother, so she represents motherhood. She represents nurturing. She represents caretaking, and her focus is on self. So we're not focused on taking care of other people. We're focused on taking care of Theresa. That's what Ceres really wants you to do, is to take care of Theresa. Every Libra I've ever known will throw themselves in a pit of fire to save another person, or to do something for, or to help another person. Every single Libra I've ever known is like that. Okay, with the exception of one, actually. I can think of one Libra who is not like that. Bottom line is that it's okay to be like that. And there's nothing wrong with being like that, but you have to counterbalance that with self-care. The issue with why it's a problem for Libras to do that is because most people who sacrifice themselves for other people have this expectation that they're always going to get it back. And that is not true. And you've probably learned in the past numerous times that that's not necessarily always true. Sometimes it is, but not always. So, oh no, I'm yawning. The bottom line is, by understanding that past pattern, it actually helps you and reminds you that it's okay to take care of everybody else, but nobody can take care of you better than you. And that's always the way it's going to be. I like to be taken care of too from time to time, but it's like when my husband makes me a fried egg sandwich, and I think, oh, I didn't have to get up and cook it. And then my next thought is, I would have done this different. And then decided maybe I should have got up and made the fried egg sandwiches myself. And then they would have been done right. It's a horrible, 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 horrible hamster wheel we put ourselves through. We just have to stop doing it. It's okay. We can eat it the wrong way every once in a while and appreciate being taken care of. But ultimately, taking the time out of my busy schedule to make that fried egg sandwich my way for me, that's self-care right there. And I'm not saying I won't make one for my husband. I'm just saying, just the time that I'm spending creating that for myself, as well as my husband, I enjoy that. I enjoy being able to take the time to do that for myself in a life where that can be very difficult sometimes. So yes, self-care is very important. It is extremely important to the balance of absolutely everything that's going on around us. And Libras are really all about balance. When it comes down to it, you guys are the scales, it's all about balance, really. The other thing that I am being shown for you is I see you on skates. It's kind of funny. Okay. Your dad is saying there's a challenge coming up for you, but you're gonna skate right through it. And he's literally showing me like you on skates, but like skis, okay? Just skating right through it. So it's a breeze. You're gonna worry about it. He says, don't worry about it, but you're gonna worry about it, but don't worry about it because you are literally just gonna skate right through that. So, because you're awesome. That's what I have for you, Theresa. I am going to take a little breaky break and be right back for the rest of them. Hey, moving on to Regina. No planets in Scorpio this week. That will be different next week. Focus is on your thoughts. Lots of focus on your thoughts this week. Might have said this before. If I did, it's coming up again to be mindful of your thought process in terms of negative versus positive mindset, I guess. The other thing is one of the things that came up in the horoscopes is really about ideas and what happens to your ideas when you don't have a positive mindset, if that makes sense. And I just am I was kind of thinking of you as why this is coming up when I was doing the horoscopes, because I was sort of visualizing lots of ideas that you've had, but also a lot of opportunities for your brain to talk you out of pursuing those ideas, if that makes sense. You don't have the money for it, you can't do it on your own, blah blah. There's a million different excuses that we can come up with. Humans are really, really, really very good at coming up with excuses. I feel like there's a couple of opportunities that'll be coming up around that. I also want to say that if you focus on some of the ideas that you have had that have been successful, you'll probably notice that there wasn't a whole lot of time to think about it. You just sort of had to do it like right then and there and find out if it worked or not, basically like on the fly. So that kind of gives you the sort of clue as to whether or not thinking about an idea ahead of time is really a good idea. I mean, we can overthink things to death, really. I mean, human beings are we're terrible. We're terrible when it comes to that sort of thing. Also, I know we said we're going to mention the moon next week when it comes in next week, but when it does come in next week, it's going to be squared with Venus and Mars, the two of them working together, which when they work together are like the perfect example of the masculine and feminine working together. So our logic and our creativity, or ideas and creativity, logic and emotion, different things like that. So I feel like the idea is the creativity, and the excuses that your brain comes up are all the logic that kind of sort of beats that creativity out of you. And if you sort of branch that out into your environment, you might even see different aspects where your creativity is being stifled in a way. And in many ways, it is being stifled by you, but also by other people in some ways, if that makes sense. The other thing, I'm seeing this opportunity to just really speak your truth coming up this week. And I mean, like, in some cases, in the way you've always wanted to, if that makes sense. I have this new chair and I can't put my feet up, and it's making me crazy. Speaking your truth, or standing up for yourself, or just plain old, I've had it and I am not willing to play this game anymore kind of an attitude. And I do feel like this is around work mainly, where it's almost like you've been pushed too far. They've actually pushed you to the point where they have pushed you too far. And they have just learned of your breaking point. I think you might have scared a few people, if that makes sense. Which may make you feel bad, but in the long run, it's kind of a good thing, actually. People need to know that you have boundaries, and they also need to know not to cross them. And the more you forgive them for doing so, the more you're training them that it is okay to dance on your boundaries like they don't mean anything. And I don't think that that's really the direction you want it to go in, if that makes sense. So it comes to a head, unfortunately. But fortunately, because now everybody knows their place, if that makes sense. I don't want that to seem like, feudal or anything like that, but everybody knows what you're capable of, and everybody knows what you will put up with and what you won't, if that makes sense. Enjoy that. That's what I have for you this week. Moving on to Theresa, we have no planets in Scorpio this week. Focus is on the mind. I do see a lot of worry. I don't know if you're a nail biter, but that's what I'm being shown. I'm not a nail biter, so my nails are offended that I kind of bit them. Definitely feel a situation that would warrant worry for sure. I mean, I can tell you not to worry because it's not going to help the situation, but you're not going to not worry either. Might I suggest taking breaks from the worry, giving your mind something to do other than focus on the worry, if that makes sense. To give yourself breaks from it so it doesn't consume you, if that makes sense. Also a good idea to reach out and talk to people. When you reach out and talk to people, it keeps things less in your head. It's easier to make sense of them. In some cases, it's just easier to take your mind off of what's going on in your mind, if that makes sense also. Again, it's giving yourself breaks. I feel like it's something pretty, definitely something pretty big. Definitely warrants a lot of worry. You need to, it's okay to pamper yourself. You're not being disloyal. Nobody said that you were supposed to be miserable during this time. Nobody said that. I feel like there might be two things actually that you're worried about. One close to your heart, one close to your head, if that makes sense. Family, work. You may even have to put one of them down for a bit, because one does seem heavier than the other, but the other one sort of creeps in from time to time. And I feel like when I say you're worrying about something, usually you counteract that by trying to do whatever you can to be productive in the situation. And I just don't feel that there is any way for you to be productive in the situation. And this is why it's such a difficult situation. But there are ways that you can be productive around it, if that makes sense. And there may be a couple of things you can focus some time on that you haven't had time for before, if that makes sense. They may not be anything that you want to be focusing on at all. But it's better than nothing, if that makes sense. I just want to give you like 10 hugs and 5 kisses. That's what I have for you, Theresa. I'm going to move on to Jillian. There's no planets in Scorpio this week. Focus continues to be on the mind and how you think. You have a very active imagination for a reason. It's the first thing I want to tell you. I was born with a very active imagination. In fact, most of us were. But yeah, you have a very active imagination for a reason. And you know things are going to happen before they happen. That's part of that active imagination, believe it or not. But also, you can create what you can imagine. You just got to be willing to put the work into it. And no, there's no getting through life without putting the work into it. It's just impossible. Trust me, if there was, I would have found it by now. Hell, your grandma Linda would have found it by now. You got some really good ideas in that head of yours, is what I'm being told. I'm also being told to tell you that it's worth it to do something with them. There's a couple of them in particular that are really good ones. I kind of feel like, you're worried about what everybody else is going to think about them. It really isn't up to anybody else. It is kind of your life. My opinion is, as long as it's not self-destructive in any way, shape, or form, do it. Take the first steps. It's a leap of faith. Life is one leap of faith after another. And sometimes the faith works out and sometimes it doesn't. You have to be aware of celebrating when it does work out and not focusing on when it doesn't, but moving on. That didn't work out. Brush yourself off and move on, kind of a thing. I'm also seeing baby chicks. It's baby chick season. But babies in general also indicate new beginnings, and I'm seeing several of them. So that can indicate a couple of different things. One, there might be 2 or 3 different offers or different possibilities for a new job, or even moving around in the job that you have. More money, more hours. Or there could be a few opportunities for you to look into outside of the job you're currently working. And that doesn't mean that you don't work that job. You could work both. Because I don't see that the hours from either one of them are going to take up like all of your time, if that makes sense. You could work both until you figure out which one seems to fit your schedule better, if that makes sense. There's one in particular that's really good. So if you've been eyeballing them and thinking about it, stop thinking about it and pursue. See what happens. The last thing I'm being shown for you is a weeping willow tree. They're like my favorite trees. They're like so full of spiders and bugs. It's not even funny, but they're still my favorite. I love to hide in them or just sit in there in that space by myself. And I feel like that's sort of like your bubble, if that makes sense. It's like when you put yourself in your protective bubble, that's where you're like inside the tree almost, sort of peeking out through the leaves at other people. You do know that you can do that like all the time, right? Like literally all the time. Like I'm at work, there's too many people, I'm picking up all the vibes, bring my branches around me, and that sort of helps you to block that out so that you're not taking on everything that everybody else, is feeling and experiencing and all that craziness. Um, or you put yourself in your bubble, but I see the weeping willow branches and leaves like swirling around it, or ivy sort of swirling around it, if that makes sense. Because you like to make your bubble pretty, and I totally get it. That's cool. Yeah, and that's what I have for you, darling. I'm going to move on to Sheri. Focus is on the home. There are no planets in Sagittarius at this time. Okay. First thing I'm being shown, or I'm hearing, the house has been turned upside down. But I think that where we're going with this actually is something that comes up that makes you feel like it's going to turn the house upside down, but doesn't actually, if that makes sense. That could be an influx of people coming in that aren't normally there. That could be a situation that happens outside of the home that's affecting the people inside of it. And I'm seeing your dad specifically around this also. Like I keep seeing him sitting there specifically. So I'm not sure if maybe it has something to do with his family. Or things going on with that. whatever it is, I don't see it something as something where, it flips the house upside down and you're like that for months. It is sort of temporary, I guess. Um, yeah, I think it might have to do with his brother, actually. So that's one thing that I'm being shown. Seen Karna? Sure what that's about. I know you transferred all of her mother's stuff from her to you. Um, I know she said that was okay. I don't expect that was the end of it, so that might have something to do with it. But it's almost like the way it always has been, you get in your spats and then you're best friends again. So I guess that's good. I guess that's the outcome. Last thing I have is Jody, that chick that was the friend of your brother's. Somebody is not happy with her, and it's not Kelly, it's your mom. She keeps saying, "Oh, that Jody," and like she's mad. I don't know what that's about either. you'll have to you'll have to clue me in on that later. Anyways, that's what I have for you this week. I'm moving on to Peg. Focus is on the home this week. No planets to influence that. My coffee is broken. What am I gonna do? Okay. What I see this week, I feel like the word foundation is really important this week. Almost like you're rechecking your foundation, but this isn't the foundation of your house. This is more like the foundation of your plans, the foundation of your business, the foundation of your finances. It's going back to the beginning, um, in many ways. And I feel that's kind of important this week. There's something about going back to the beginning that is important. And specifically, there's an element of going back to the beginning to see the story in a different perspective. That possibly could indicate, like, say, somebody explaining an experience that you remember, but their different perception of the experience maybe changes the memory for you, if that makes sense. For the good or for the bad, it could go either way. I'm also being shown a Pegasus, and I'm being told to tell you to spread your wings. Pegasus is a magical animal. As she says, which proves that magic exists. And I feel like at times you long for the magic or the comfort of your spiritual beliefs, but they've been shaken in some way, and it's almost like you've lost them, or you've lost your zen, or I totally understand where you're coming from here. And the only way to get it back is just to go back to it. Regardless of what you know, regardless of what you learned, regardless of how things have changed over the years, you just have to go back to it. Archangel Michael is like, you just have to believe again. That's it. That's all you have to do. It seems like such a tall order sometimes. The last thing that I have for you is my visualization is literally like you hitting flies with a fly swatter. But to me, that's a representation of eliminating your obstacles. A fly isn't exactly an obstacle, but it's the frustration of it being there that gets in the way, and it creates an obstacle. When you get rid of it, the obstacle goes away. And Archangel Michael says it really is just as easy as that. The more you think about it and the more you overthink it, the bigger of a problem it is. And the more powerful it is, and the more you resist actually doing anything about it. So he's showing me this huge fly, but it's actually a little teeny tiny fly. And he says, you get to choose which one you're dealing with, if that makes sense. And that's what I have for you, Peg. Moving on to Mama Sheri. No planets in Sagittarius this week. Focus is on the home. And as much as you love it, I feel like you really want to get out. I think I said this last week too, but I really feel like you really want to get out. Like the walls are just making you crazy. You need an adventure, you need excitement, you need to shake things up a bit. You need, not, I mean, it's not as big as I may be making it sound to be, but you do need those things. You're a Sagittarian, for God's sakes. You can't just be at home all the time. And that's okay. I am being shown you actually walking around the property for exercise purposes. Not because you need to exercise necessarily, but because it's a way of getting your blood moving, but also giving that energy an outlet, if that makes sense. When you start to get too stuffy, for lack of a better way of saying it. The other thing that I'm being shown. Okay. I don't know what this is about. Like maybe a piece of jewelry or a necklace or something like that. Something that's missing and you can't find it and you've looked everywhere. And I'm being told by your mom to tell you to go back to the first place you looked, because that's where it is. Frustrating. Would have solved a lot of problems if you just found it in the first place. Last thing that I'm being shown for you is there's a person that's been on your mind a lot lately. You keep thinking maybe you should reach out to them. I kind of get the feeling this is Tiffany. Well, you know your own brain when that happens, you probably should reach out to them. They haven't reached out to you. So there's your confirmation. That's what I have for you this week. And finally, moving on to Alyssa. So we continue to have Saturn and Neptune as bookends in Pisces. Saturn is in a grand sextile with Jupiter and the Sun for most of the week. It starts to break up towards, I'm sorry, it's not quite a grand sextile at the beginning of the week, but as we progress in, becomes a much bigger aspect. And Saturn's focus is on your day-to-day schedule, and it's retrograde. This is actually kind of interesting in terms of the makeup of these planets. Jupiter's focus is on finances, and the Sun's focus is on career, how you're going to make that money. So one of the things that came up in terms of the horoscopes is most people have this thing. I am one of those people who says the words, I don't have time, like a lot, like way more than I should, right? Because the more you say something, the more you make it a reality. So not having time, it becomes too easy to say, I don't have enough time to do blah, 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 right? When you're responsible for your schedule, you have control over how much time you have, so you can make time whenever you want, right? The issue is not whether you have time or not. The issue is, how are you using that time, and are you using it to the best, its best benefit, kind of a thing. So basically, Jupiter is all about growth and expansion in your finances. And if you could do that, you would make time, right? So just because you don't know for sure how it's going to work out doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, if that makes sense. But on the flip side of that, Neptune is in a square with the Sun. So here the Sun's really helpful over here, but not so much over here. And Neptune's focus is on relationships. So this kind of sort of showcases where, okay, I'm going to make time for this opportunity that's going to make me money. Oh, but these wonderful people that I love so much are getting in the way, because what, you have responsibilities to your nephew's mom, your grandma. The list goes on and on and on. The people, that are in your family that you're responsible to. So it's worth sitting down and communicating, honestly, to try and see if you can come up with a compromise. Or I take care of my grandma. She's 90 years old. She really needs me. I have to schedule my whole entire existence around her. And that I can do because she makes it very easy for me. These are the days and the times that I'm available for you specifically, and she fits into those times. Not everybody can do that, but you can work with somebody to be able to be open and communicate so that you can take care of them while taking care of your goals as well. So it takes a little bit of work, and it takes a little bit of structure and some organization. And trust me, I write everything down on my schedule. If it's not on my schedule, it's not going to happen. That's all there is to it. That way I have as much control over my schedule as possible while allowing flexibility, because let's face it, things change on a dime all the time. They always do. And that's okay, right? But you're taking away that I don't have time excuse by allowing other people's inability to be structured stand in your way of being structured, if that makes sense. So if you are continuing to think about that store idea that you have, you can come up with ideas and work on recipes and do all that stuff on your own time. It's not a question of whether or not you have a time. It is always a question of how you're using that time. And trust me when I say nobody knows how to waste time better than I do. So I hear you on that one. Sometimes we do need to waste time. That's why that time wasting is literally in my schedule. Waste time in my schedule, because that way I'm giving myself what I want while remaining structured at the same time. So it's a thought. It's an idea that you can use if you so choose to. And that's what I have for you, darling. And that's what I have for everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging out with the readings for the week. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. You guys make it a great week, and I will see you next week.